Kia ora everyone and welcome to another session of Shift Happens. It seems like these are rolling out pretty fast at the moment, but it seems like people are getting value from holding these conversations. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit webinared out. There's been a lot of webinars and formal kind of proceedings going on, and for me right now, it's no time for slides. It's time for real, meaningful conversations with people who have insights to share. And one of those people is Lance Jensen. Kia ora, Lance.
Hey, how you going?
Good, bro. So I've been loosely engaged or in touch with Lance for a few years through Wellington circles, but didn't really at Wellington and Australian circles actually, and I didn't really connect properly until an epic retreat that we both ended up on with Rebette Hollis and the Power Moves crew in Queenstown, which I'm really glad we got that in actually.
Yeah, that was a fantastic weekend. Certainly changed a lot of things for me actually.
Yeah, massively. Totally agree.
And actually, like you said, the whole lack of PowerPoints, lack of slides, that was a big catalyst for me in terms of changing some of the tone of our conversations as well. There were no PowerPoints on that one. There was no structure. It was just conversations.
That's true. That's actually true. It was completely stripped back that weekend, wasn't it? And it really worked. And I think at the moment, if I'm thinking about the content I'm absorbing and engaging with through this whole COVID-19 pandemic, whenever I feel like people are dropping into some kind of formal, structured PowerPoint or something where they're trying to roll out advice, I just think there's not a system for this. There's not a guidebook for this one. We can't just be rolling out the same advice we always have been. These are really interesting, disruptive, unprecedented times, and I think we have a unique opportunity as business owners. We're not very good at this. As men, we're not very good at this. As Kiwis, we're not very good at this. But we've got an interesting opportunity where people suffer personal crises every day, right? Marriage breakups, financial hardship, businesses close every day, people lose their jobs. On a small scale, this kind of thing is happening all the time, but we very rarely connect with each other about it, and we very rarely talk about it. And what's different about this crisis is that no one is really immune from it. And whilst there's a spectrum of effectiveness, we are all in this together, and it's giving us an opportunity to crack things open and have a chat about things that have probably always been there for most people.
That's certainly the experience I'm having with my clients, and I'm with you. That the stuff that I'm engaging with, or I'll say resonating with when I am watching online, it is the real conversations. Anything that feels like a script or a PowerPoint or a slideshow, and then anything that moves into what feels like selling. It's just, especially at the moment, instant turn off. We've got to connect first. Everybody's going through this. You can't just watch from the sidelines. Everyone's going to have a different journey, obviously, but no one's immune. Not from this one.
And it's interesting because it's the selling thing. I mean, it's an instant turn off for me as well. It's just not the time, and it's interesting to see people making those decisions sometimes and what that shows up. But it's the other thing that has been challenging for me on some levels, and admittedly I've been walking a very fine line with it as well, but is how to have this kind of cautious optimism about the future without the blind positivity. Like, this is not a time to kind of come out the gates and be like, everything's amazing. Like, how good is the world right now?
I'm curious that you've used the same phrasing. I don't know if I've heard it from you or picked it up somewhere else, but the huge difference between optimism and positivity, and they're not the same thing, but a lot of people, I think, collapse that. So if someone's positive all the time, often it's either naive or unfounded, whereas you can still be optimistic about where you're heading and plan for a future without necessarily being ecstatic or excited or ignoring what's happening. They're definitely not the same thing.
They're not, and I think I really appreciated the video you put out last week. I think it was just saying essentially it's okay to not be okay right now, and I think when we were headed for lockdown, this kind of upsurge of social pressure came on, of like, when you get home now you need to be productive and don't waste this time, but you also need to relax and spend lots of time with your family, and so your business should come back better than ever before. It should be stronger than ever. You should do more work on it. You should get to all of those things you didn't get to, plus spend more time with your family, plus relax, plus learn some new skills, start cooking, start thinking, fuck.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a couple of days ago, you put a video about just go take a month off, like your full reset. somewhere in the middle. I've watched that. I got caught in that. So suddenly everything's different and everything, and I'm at home. All the things and all the ideas that I've been sitting on for the last over 6 months and tolerating, suddenly now was the time to change all of it, which fortunately I slapped myself out of that one reasonably quick. But yeah, I've watched a lot of people in that, and there's been that massive adrenaline spike of people feeling like they've suddenly got to change stuff. It's been a positive catalyst for some in terms of actually taking some positive steps on things that they had been tolerating. But yeah, somehow we've got to get that balance. We've still only got 24 hours in a day. Like it's
That's right, and for some people, there's obviously more going on right now. And I know, for example, I was talking to a business the other day that I would feel fairly positive they're going to go under through this, and they weren't unaware of that. And they said it's the most challenging time mentally because they're in the travel industry, and they said because we are busier than ever, but the business is falling out from under us, and so the backlog of paperwork and things that they're dealing with at the moment, and cancellations and refunds, and dealing with airlines, and all of this massive upsurge of administration that they've got to take care of, and responses and things, with a kind of eye on the horizon going, I don't know if we're going to be able to ride this one out. It's kind of an interesting predicament to be in. And I actually was thinking this week about the health minister, David Clark, as well. And I was thinking about, his extraordinarily stupid thing that he did, but also really feeling that empathy for him of going, he was obviously very stressed and carrying a lot and working from home in an incredibly important role right now. But just thinking, imagine how, knowing that he's had a slap on the wrist, and knowing that he's unlikely to bounce back from this as the health minister, but will hang on from now. It must be quite hard for him to get motivated to do a great job, because he's feeling a bit silly, a bit told off. He feels like he's let the team and the country down, and now he has to still bring his best self to work. Now, some businesses are in that situation right now, and it's an interesting place to be, right?
Very, and there's no training for this one. There's that saying that if you win lotto, it just amplifies your personality. So if you were a dickhead before, you're just a bigger dickhead. And unfortunately, in reverse, I feel like it's kind of similar. So when this amount of pressure and stress comes on, how people handle it just it just puts a big microscope or amplifier on natural tendencies. So it's been interesting to watch. But in terms of adjusting, I think it just comes down to what is your level of grit. Can you maintain an optimistic outlook without being naive, and keep showing up is almost as much as you can do in this sort of situation, and allow yourself some slack, or cut yourself some slack. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to screw up. You're going to say the wrong thing. You might bite if you're under pressure. Apologize and keep moving. There's, like you say, no one's been through this.
No, it's right. And I think also I'm having to constantly remind business owners that they didn't actually create this problem, because we take on so much, right, as a business. And that's why I acknowledge that as business owners, we're not very good at doing this anyway, because we're used to weathering our own storms in a way that, because we're in a leadership position in our business, and for people like you and I, we're also leadership with our clients as well, in terms of providing advisory and support for them. And so you do end up wearing a lot. And it is really important to be present with the fact that you did not engineer this problem. This is not one of your own doing, and it's ultimately not one that you have to carry either. And so when it comes to those conversations with staff and with your customers and with your family, and all the implications and discussions that are kind of rolling out at the moment, it's important to remember that, and that it's not all on you.
Yeah, it's a reflex though, isn't it? I mean, not just the male tendency, but definitely the business owner one. Like if there's a problem in our business, regardless of who it is, how it created, or where it came from, it's always our problem, right? So yeah, I definitely see that mindset. And I think most of the population has embraced the be kind message that's coming out. So like I say, we can make mistakes, but we can be fallible. And so long as we're not abusing that, if we apologize, there's a lot of tolerance right now. So yeah, it's It is a hard one because in the next breath, as the employer of, even for us, 15 people, you
Yeah.
do take a fair bit of responsibility on for trying to make sure that they're all still got roofs and feeding their kids, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I know for sure that anyone with an entrepreneurial kind of bent at the moment is coexisting in these two different realities, and one is, holy shit, we're plowing straight into the middle of an iceberg, and I don't know if I can survive this, and feeling all of that pressure. But on the upside, if you've in that kind of entrepreneurial headspace, I also know that this level of disruption and change is also quite exciting as well, and it's
Oh,
interesting, and you start thinking about what's on the other side. And I've certainly experienced that, and but those two things do coexist.
absolutely. Yeah, it's one I've always played with was in calmer times is the paradox between trying to be ambitious and content. So sort of happy with where you are and grateful and appreciative of what you've got and what you're doing, but in the same breath, keep striving for the next thing. So those two things don't naturally fit in the same body either. So yeah,
Mm.
100% understand that conflict in terms of.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting because I remember when I first started learning mindfulness, actually, with a previous business partner of yours, in fact, and he
Oh, right, yeah, right.
and when I
Well,
went
he started me on that same journey. So
there you go.
yeah,
And so I remember he asked in one of his initial kind of introductions, what's the one thing you're worried about? And I remember I was all there on the science of it and all there on the fact that meditation would be a useful practice. But I said, I am really worried about getting relaxing to the point that I lose my drive and ambition. It was a genuine fear for me. It's like,
yep.
what if I get so relaxed that I lose that, because that drive and ambition has given me so much in my life, and that's exactly what you're talking about, right? How do you find space for both of those things?
And I'm curious as to how you rationalize that one, because for a lot of people, it's not easy. Like for someone to actually change that way of being, they often need a hard bounce, which sounds horrible. So like for me, I always had that drive, had that strive. I was one of those annoying overachiever types. But in my 20s, my body said no a couple of times. It took me a couple of times before I figured out that that's what it was doing, telling me that you actually can't sustain this pace. You need to figure out a better balance. Um, so I got a very clear and sharp message that my body gave me, which helped me to become more okay with it and kind of realize that level of push stopped serving me. But a lot of people, how did you make your peace? Because unless I'm missing something, I'm not aware of a hard bounce or whether you have actually.
I've had a very hard bounce. It was also my body,
Right.
and it was so we've potentially been through similar journeys. Now, I was hospitalised with Crohn's disease about 4 years ago now, actually, nearly to the day, in fact.
Well, yours is even worse
Um,
than mine. Right. Okay.
and it was a very long year. I mean, I'd had been building for some time, but it was a pretty turbulent year, and this is the optimism versus the positivity thing. So in that time, I found mental reserves and strengths that I didn't know existed. I
Yep.
found things in the tank there that I wasn't aware I even had the capacity for, and I genuinely, without rose tinting the whole experience, do feel like it was one of the best things that's ever happened to me. It was the most useful teacher I've ever had getting sick. It slowed me down. It changed me significantly. And on the other side of it, the all of the things that felt in conflict before didn't feel in conflict now. I realize that all of those, that kind of calm and that peace and that leaning into that side of yourself actually better positions you for the rest of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard to actually understand or accept that intellectually or from a theoretical perspective
Mm,
until you're almost forced into it.
mm.
Very, very similar to mine. Because like, if I wasn't busy or productive, there was something wrong. Like I was failing somehow, or you know, just not doing enough. And then, like you, that when I slowed down and was clearer and calmer, the actions I took were that much more effective. I didn't have to run around like an idiot all the time to actually get things to happen. So yeah, it was I was taught it like you. I was told it kind of made sense, but until I was forced, it was very difficult to actually transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And hopefully people hear that without needing to get sick, or let their body kind of shut down beforehand. But I don't think it's an uncommon experience. And I also I also recognised in that time that the intensity of the challenge that I was facing was quite a make or break moment, because I was also connecting with and spending time with people who were going through a similar journey to me. I tapped into Facebook groups and Crohn's charity and things like that, and there were I had to come to grips with the fact that there were people in my network there who it had kind of ruined their lives. Like they were immobile and they were stuck at home and feeling kind of humiliated, and it affected their work and all of these things that I thought, oh, that's not a reality that I can accept, and I had to very quickly engage in the kind of the mental sport of going, no way, I'm not doing that, and that's not how this journey is going to go for me. And so it built, it's such a cliche saying what doesn't kill you will make you stronger, but
that phrase popped in my head when you were first talking. I was like, it is a cliche, but those cliches keep coming up for a reason, right? They obviously hold a fair amount of wisdom and truth.
Yeah, and they've come up in this conversation for a reason, right? Because in people's businesses right now, I mean, I think I'm seeing everyone's affected, and it's indiscriminate in that sense. But people are in different positions, and I am starting to see. You mentioned it before. If you're, I love that. If you're a dickhead before, you're more of a dickhead now. This is like a big magnifying glass, and actually, I feel the same about certain businesses as well. I think there are certain businesses that I have seen very quickly get an overwhelming kind of brand community response to where they're at, and they are the ones who immediately reached out to their customers and their team and said, we're here, we give a shit, we really care for you, and we'll be back. And those businesses, like I'm aware of one of them who's a client of ours, and they, their business is as it stands right now, bringing people from the US to New Zealand for tours is very challenged at the moment, like really challenged,
not existent. Yes.
and rather than kind of falling to their knees and playing poor me on this, because it's tempting to at times, and there's a space for that without a doubt, and that's why I liked your video, because there is space for both. They reached out to their customers, and they have been building this kind of loyalty with their customers that was obviously already there, but all the people that had previously been on a trip, and for some of them that's multi-generations, parents have come and then their kids have come and whatnot, and they're now sharing images and stories and memories of their trips, and they've managed to keep traveling New Zealand with their company top of mind when no one can move, and it's been so effective, and that they're really operationally have been brought to their knees. Not all companies are brought to their knees at the moment. Some of us can work from home, others can operate in essential services, some just can't do a whole lot right now other than double down on their brand, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the ones that are doing well, they put in all the legwork prior, unconsciously, unknowingly, but that's just who they were, how they operated. That was part of their ethos, their culture, and what they were doing, right? So I mean, that engenders a lot of loyalty, and that does come back in times like this. Unfortunately, if you weren't playing that way, if you weren't a good human prior to this, you're largely going to be left out by yourself.
Yeah, and I think as well with businesses who were in a position where it was very transactional, as in they didn't really have a sense of any kind of purpose or story behind their business, or point of difference and things, then that is also a challenge right now. And so some people might be coming to grips with that, and I know that you and I both share the view that it's we have to be, it's an important time to be delicate, because we're talking about people's livelihoods here, and it is serious. But I think also my experience so far from sharing, and I had a great conversation the other day with Manoli, who seems you knew as well, from Wellington days, and it was. We had a chat about the fact that some businesses will need to close, and we chatted about it before I hit record, and I consciously went back there and said, no, let's talk about that, and it is important to be delicate in all those things. But actually, the sense I got, comments and also some follow-up conversations with people, is that it's people are feeling, they feel very relieved to hear that sometimes, because for some businesses, and I don't know how it's going with the people you're coaching and talking to, but some business, the writing is on the wall, and that it requires either a complete pivot or shutting the doors. And initial priority was get home, get your ISO sorted, sort your family out, make sure you got your oxygen mask on. But we are at a stage now where I believe people are going, okay, what does reopening look like? What does pivoting look like? Or what happens if neither of those things work for me?
I think it was a similar conversation I just had with someone else. It's like, it feels like the panic and that massive adrenaline spike is now subsiding. So people are in a better position to start considering options and what this looks like once the lockdown is actually released. And it's the 5 stages of grief, right? I think I chucked up a post about that because that was one that surprised me. I hadn't considered grief as the emotion or the turmoil that we were actually going through. But it made sense. And one of the big ones there is denial. Like you just don't want to face quite what is in front of you. And business closures is a massive one and is a very scary one. But in the next breath, I don't know if you've noticed this, if you're stalling on making a big decision, once you actually make a call and make that decision and start moving, even without having had the result yet, suddenly there's a huge pressure release in terms of mental weight and your ability to move and actually function and then achieve something is significantly enhanced, right? So if that is the case and that's the barrel people are looking down, at some point they need to make a decision and a call, and at which point, while there's still obviously things to sort out, it will actually make the process of stepping into that and through that much simpler. It's that having a foot on both sides of the fence that kills you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm really glad you said that, actually, because it's been on my mind, and it's that the worst place to be right now is in the middle of the road, because you just get knocked down by both sides, right? You're not confident that you can bounce back, but you haven't made the decision, and you're just getting crushed by both ends of that kind of emotional train, and it's like I'm reminded always of a saying. I don't really know where it came from, actually, but it's the resistance to the pain is often worse than the pain itself, and I think a lot of
a worse metaphor, which really resonated with me, was it's basically the monkey's tail. Do you chop it off in pieces, or do you actually just lop it off all at once?
Yeah,
it's a painful process, and with a business, the overhead, the outgoings, they take time and money to actually shut down anyway. So if don't make the call lightly, but if that's the call you're making, make the call and move.
yeah, I agree, and I think there are definitely businesses in that position who are coming around to that conclusion. I mean, that is at the really harsh end of the spectrum, but it is people's realities, and I think rather than kind of in our position of business coaching and things, rather than come out the gates and saying it's all going to be okay and we're all just be positive and let's get into it, I think people need to hear that it is okay to also to face reality, what it might be for your business. And my sense is that most people are not in this position, but some people are, and that'll be a huge emotional roller coaster, and it gets more expensive and harder the longer you leave it, I think, as well. And so that is that kind of transparency and honesty is right now with yourself and with your team, I think is really important. And I guess my advice would be, if you are in that position, then try not to go it alone, because there is support out there available. You need to share the load.
I would strongly encourage people to get an objective third party involved to actually bounce those ideas off, because when you're neck deep in your own stuff, you can't. It's very difficult to objectively see opportunities or yourself clearly. So that has to be someone you trust, someone that you're willing to be vulnerable with. Like that's, I'm aware not everybody has those people in the world. It's probably naturally the space and the place that you and I get to play all day every day, but it's not the reality for a lot of people, which is hard. I mean, I had a conversation. You talked about tourism or travel in particular with an independent travel broker. She's in the exact same boat, and after going around about 6 different angles and trying to figure out if there was any opportunity there, that the best advice that she heard and was willing to take on was love your clients, use the subsidy that the government has funded you and prepare your own CV. It's the nature of where she is right now, with no certainty of when international borders are ever going to open up again, which is hard. But in the next breath, I got a bunch of other clients, and it was Tony Alexander, actually, one of his talks or articles. What's happening right now isn't a stimulus package from the government. It's a hibernation package. And the challenge will be, as we come back out of it, what's the tail look like? How slow is the uptake in terms of people returning? But for the most part, they've just bought us a month of time. No, it's not amazing, and yeah, a few of us would have had to dip into our pockets and reserves. But actually, for the most part, it was just a big pause button, and we'll find out how we get moving again in the coming month.
I totally agree, and I think it was, I'm very grateful that we got that pause, because it was an opportunity for people to really consolidate their thinking, and it was just the speed at which, I mean, I don't know about you, but it was like night and day for me, the difference between being pre-lockdown and in lockdown. Like, it was just so much better once we were all home. It was just so much calmer, because the grey area was very uncomfortable. It was people weren't sure whether to be open or not. They weren't sure what was coming. They weren't sure when. I mean, I think the government did a superb job on the communications of it. But anyone with the communications head knew, and they said, there's 4 levels. Oh, okay, right, we're going to level 4. And I think, we knew that
this is how quick.
How quickly can people cope, basically? And so the government, the government's response right now, it is a band-aid. Stop the bleeding, give people a chance to have a think about it. Different businesses will emerge differently. I do a fair bit of work with the food and fibre sector. They are not unaffected, but of course they are in the essential services category. And also the experience of some of those producers is that when, say, China came out of lockdown, the demand for New Zealand produce was still really high. And so there are sectors that are definitely well positioned for it. There are sectors that will require a complete kind of redesign of how it operates, but there will be the stimulus has not begun, and there will be a significant stimulus. I guess I would, there's some obvious winners on the end of that, and I think I would caution, even when we're thinking about domestic tourism and thinking about local markets, and we do need to be very cognizant of the fact that disposable incomes are going to be stretched on the other side of this. And so if you're kind of, I think, in the travel industry in particular, if you're in a luxury kind of category like skydiving or helicopter flights or something, you will be able to find markets, but the family of 4 coming, traveling around New Zealand aren't all going to fork out for a skydive, and so the market will change. And I think it's useful to start thinking right now, if you're in travel or retail or hospitality or any of those connected industries that rely on international tourism, that just recognizing your market is going to change, and if you are still in the game, which I think a lot of people are, then it's time to start adjusting your kind of offering to meet that, and start thinking about how to capture some benefit on the other side.
Yeah, and people are going to have to get creative. In the next breath, like I say, this sounds terrible, that there are going to be a bunch in that space and in those industries that don't survive either. So I guess their market share, while the market has reduced, their market share has increased. Yep. And they need to make sure that they're actually leveraging and tapping into that. There's communication and how they get out to the customers and out to that world is going to be hugely important. I'm hoping there'll be a shift in the average punter's psyche to actually support the little guy a bit more. I don't know what sort of sentiment you're getting, but it feels like there's been a bit of groundswell towards that and wanting to look after the little fellas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I see as a positive, and we can definitely tap into that sentiment. Long may it last. So yeah, there's no easy answer. I feel like once we are allowed back out, there's even locally, there's not going to be a mad rush back to the cafes or the pubs or to large social gatherings. The fundamentals still have to happen. Trades will continue. The building will continue. A large amount of the services will continue, but still that, like I say, that discretionary spend, especially in a social group type setting, is there's going to be a long tail before people have that confidence to head back into that sort of environment, I would have thought.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that the the hardest thing for people to contend with at the moment is just not having those answers, and it's really important that we, as best possible, recognise the challenges that comes with that, but accept that and kind of move forward with preparing for all scenarios. And so I think every business owes it to themselves and their staff and their customers right now to run a worst case scenario. I was in touch with all of our clients kind of immediately, even before lockdown, and looking at those scenarios. And I know one in particular that relies heavily on impact investing and international export, and they're a social enterprise essentially. We did the hard conversation of looking at that scenario of going, okay, so revenue drops to zero, our investors pull out because they might be challenged as well, and where does that leave us, and what are the implications? And it was not a particularly exciting conversation to be having, but fast forward 2 weeks, and it's not the reality. The investors have doubled down. They're very supportive. We've actually found ways to maintain operations. Staff are on board. It's actually turned out to be a lot more positive, and I think people are better right now to run the worst case scenarios, get kind of present with that, and then get to work on making sure that's not the case.
Well, if you can accept the worst case, anything else is better, right? So that definitely makes sense. And the other benefit to that for me, and I've done the same thing, a whole bunch of forecasting and what if scenarios. If we drop by half, if we drop to zero, if and when you actually see then those realities starting to show up or happen, you've done 3/4 of the thinking. Right, so you're not in that position of knee-jerk reactions and panic and like, holy crap, again, and go and do something stupid that you're going to regret. Like you've had the time to process those scenarios. So when they show up, you're already 3/4 of the way through the problem because you've already made those calls and decisions. It's just about actioning them now. And I think there's a lot of benefit and merit in that.
Yeah, and you're right, and I think also depending on what industry you're in. So if you're not operational at the moment, and you kind of alluded to it before, Lance, but there's out of lockdown, out of level 4, we all know it's not business as usual, right? That's not going to be the case, and so there are I can see. I think I mentioned at the interview with Manoli, a hairdresser. I'm quite keen to get back to my barber. I think everyone's keen for me to get back to my barber, and I know that my barber is usually quite busy, and week 1 that we're allowed to, they will be run off their feet. Now they don't have a booking system; they've got nothing in place, and they'll need one. Otherwise, it will be overwhelming, and there's potential for really bad customer experiences on the other side of it as well. And likewise, I think restaurants and things. Who knows, but I suspect it will be a kind of staged approach, and there were restaurants and hospitality outlets that were adapting to things like sitting every second table being empty, for example, focusing on takeaways. There was companies doing deliveries, and I know that one of our favourite local restaurants, before they shut the doors a couple of days earlier than they had to, and then they actually packaged up their products in vacuum packs and gave it to us, and we could drop it in a pot and cook it over 15 minutes and get the meal we used to have at the restaurant. And it was a very fast response. It was really successful. Yeah, it was really successful, and they and it was great because we got our interaction with that restaurant before closure. We got to kind of I got to see them, I guess, and have an experience with them, and then it got rid of a whole lot of stock for them too.
That's still front of mind through lockdown as well.
Completely.
Yeah,
totally. And it was really smart. And I think I'm harping on about it a lot, but I'm also a big fan of friends of mine, the Chia sisters. They're a beverage company here in Nelson, and they were 80%. They've said this publicly, so they were 80% hospitality for their drinks, and so that stopped overnight, and 20% kind of retail. Now they went online with their drinks and started selling a bit more proactively because they still fitted the essential services category, and then they thought, okay, what are the prospects on the other side for our business, and kind of who's affected by this closure. And so they said, look, we right now it's very important that we support cafes, and so when you buy your drinks off Chia now, you nominate the cafe you want, and they give 20% of the revenue to the cafe, which gets cash through to, not credit, but cash through to cafes at a time where that could be it could be the only money they're getting, or is the only money they're getting for most of them. Nice. And
that's their existing or previously. That's their previous customers. The loyalty that's going to create huge.
It is, but they've gone one step further than that and said no. In any cafe,
Oh wow.
yeah. So now if you're a cafe owner right now, and you're staring at your drinks fridge in your mind, who's standing out right now in there? It's not Coke.
Only one brand, right?
It's not Coke's not shining right now. They are, and they're a small local business who will be really affected by this. There's a small and a tight margin industry, and they thought about it. And I guess that's what, and all of this disruption and all of the pain and that's people are experiencing at the moment. I feel like the right thing to do and the most effective thing to do have never been closer.
Yes, yeah, which is a fantastic alignment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us in our industry, we've always, you and I mean, I've had the slide for the last 5 years. Stop selling, start helping. That's been like one of the first things out the gate in my workshop. Everyone needs. People are sick and tired of being sold to. They're over it. There's fatigue in the marketplace. You need to work out how you can add value and help people. And the only thing that I've done is gone, no, I really fucking mean it. Like you need to stop selling and start helping now. But I meant it a few months ago as well.
And you're an exemplar of it. I mean, even all with just everything you're doing at the moment, like it shows up. Even just the videos that I've put out, the response has been very surprising, like incredibly positive. A lot of gratitude, just because you're just sharing good information. You're not trying to sell anything. You're not asking for anything. You're just trying to look after people. And look, and I'm not naive or stupid. Neither are you. Like, I know that's going to bear fruit at the back of this. So let's keep doing that. Let's keep looking after people, because the more people that are grateful and happy, the more people we've got to play with when we all come back.
Exactly, and it's the same. It's no different for the Chia sisters. They knew exactly that this was a very useful, tangible way to show their support for cafes. But on the other side of it, it'll also be extremely effective. We ordered our box straight away, right? It's like that's where I want to channel my money right now, and I've absolutely getting the same indicators, which is that the support for, I know a lot of people are uncomfortable right now because a lot of, the money in circulation is going to supermarkets. We only have 2 supermarket companies in the country. And in Motueka, for example, a lot of the produce is shipped up from Christchurch right now, while our local growers have got stuff going off. And so there's all these things showing up that were actually a problem before as well, but they're really visible all of a sudden. Yeah, and I think there are things that we will change through this in our response, such as I'm being much more conscious of how to access and support local businesses right now as best we possibly can. I hope there's things like that we just don't go back on. There should be permanent changes.
Yeah, I hope so too. And that's what I was talking about, that sentiment for the little guys. I think everybody's very much seeing that, and a lot of people, I mean, I can't remember the stats in terms of small business New Zealand, but a lot of people are directly affected by this, so that they can now understand and see the impact that much more, I think. So yeah, if that continues, I'll be very happy, and I think it should. I did have another thing I was going to raise, but it's completely slipped my mind. So
I don't know the feeling. It's been happening to me all week. I was going to wrap up on the point of if you are, in terms of staying top of mind, there's been some obvious ways for if you're in a business like ours and thought leadership and advisory and things. We're still in a capacity to serve and deliver right now. Some people aren't, and I just want to remind people. I've said it a lot, but I want to remind people that even if you're a cafe with their doors shut at the moment, now's still the time to double down on being top of mind. You still want to be talking to people. You still want to be reaching out, showing you care, reminiscing about those times. If you are confident of your bounce back in particular, start talking about that. Start getting people excited, and really just make sure that as a brand you are putting effort in right now to making sure you matter on the other end of it as well.
Yep. And the one other thing I'd add to that is, if there's any way you can manage, try to create that personal connection. It takes a lot more time and effort than the mass broadcasts and the automated channels that might be out there, but the response and reaction to it will be infinitely more powerful. So, we're sitting there, we have the time, actually make that effort and be authentic with it, that the connection will be that much stronger and the response will be that much greater.
Awesome. Hey, great note to leave it. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad I pressed record straight away. This is about the time that I'd now hit record and we'll talk about how to access your wage subsidy or something.
Boring. Everyone wants to hear about. Yep. Nice to talk to you, man.
Awesome. Cheers, Lance. Talk soon.
Talk soon.